If you're ever offered a high-paying job at this remote gas station, think twice before accepting. I've been working at this quaint, old-fashioned gas station for a few months now. Unlike the sleek, modern stations like BP, this one boasts an aura of nostalgia with its faded paint and time-worn charm. Nestled a little off the highway in a sleepy town, it doesn't attract throngs of customers. The station mostly sees a regular cadre of locals and a mix of rugged truck drivers or the occasional lost traveler. Interestingly, the turnover of faces is high. It's rare to encounter the same person twice. If you veer right after exiting the highway, you'll find yourself amid bustling gas stations and eateries. However, a left turn leads you down a lonely mile of lush trees until our station appears, isolated except for the remains of a McDonald's that relocated years ago to a busier locale. The old McDonald's signs, never removed, occasionally lure errant drivers who inevitably perform the turn of shame. At 28, having twice dropped out of college, I felt a twinge of embarrassment working here. I relocated to this small town, 50 miles from where I grew up, mainly to escape the familiar questioning, "How have you been? Still in school? You graduate yet?" The anonymity was a relief, not to mention the slightly cheaper rent. After applying to various jobs, I stumbled upon this gas station offering a surprisingly high wage, merely labeled gas station in the ad. Curious, I drove out to verify its legitimacy. Indeed, it was legitimate, and I started immediately. I work alongside two colleagues, including Margot, who hired me on the spot during my interview. Having been here since the station's inception in the 70s, Margot is in her 60s and embodies resilience. Although she's always been kind to me, she's a formidable presence, not hesitating to assert her authority when a trucker steps out of line. I've witnessed tough men shrink under Margot's stern words. She believes in standing your ground firmly and shutting down disrespect immediately. The other worker here is Josh. He's the quiet type, friendly, but reserved. I'm not great at guessing ages, and I've never asked, but he seems to be in his 30s, definitely not in his 40s or younger than 20. His long hair and beard make it even harder to pin down his age. Margot took charge of my initial training. She guided me through the basics at the register. It's your typical gas station clerk job. After my training, I was quickly assigned to the night shift. Something peculiar happened last week that started off as a regular early morning. A large, imposing trucker approached the counter and blurted out, "You got a serious creep problem here." Confused, I asked, "What do you mean?" He explained, "There's some weirdo spying in the bathrooms. I think I scared him off, though. If I wasn't in a compromised position, I would have tackled him." I was stunned. I hadn't noticed anyone unusual near the restrooms, but given their hidden location behind racks of merchandise, it wasn't surprising I might miss something. Plus, during the quieter hours, I tended to relax a bit and check my phone, confident I wouldn't be reprimanded. "Keep your eyes open. He might come back," the trucker warned as he burped, paying for his Red Bull and peanuts. After he left, I couldn't shake off a creeping sense of unease for the rest of the shift, which dragged on slowly. Only a couple more customers came in before 3 a.m., when I really needed to use the bathroom, but I didn't dare approach it until my replacement arrived. That morning, it was Josh who took over. I greeted him with the usual "hey there" as he walked in. Josh always responded with the same brief "hi," and then he'd walk over to log his time in the book. I had spent most of the night debating whether to tell him about the incident. I didn't want to alarm him unnecessarily. Why should he endure the same anxiety I had? Despite it being morning, the isolation of this place made any time feel unsettling. After all, crimes can happen any time, not just at night. "Hey man," I cautiously began. "A customer mentioned a peeping Tom in the bathroom earlier. It might be nothing, but just keep an eye out." Josh didn't seem particularly concerned. He simply shrugged and said, "Okay." I envied his nonchalance. I had been on edge all night. Reflecting on it, I realized that longtime workers probably get used to all sorts of bizarre occurrences. If I planned to last here, I'd need to adapt as well. My next 2 days were off, and I didn't give the peeping Tom another thought until I returned for my next night shift. I parked my car in my usual spot, right beside the entrance, a strategy meant to deter robbers by making the station look occupied. I've always thought a keen thief might notice the car never moves, but I've kept that to myself. The real deterrent here isn't clever parking, but the mere fact that there's hardly ever more than $300 in the register. I often wonder how this place stays in business. That night, I walked in to find the station unexpectedly empty. Josh must have been in the bathroom. Assuming he'd hear the entry bell, I went behind the counter and logged my time. Still no sign of him. I didn't want to seem intrusive, but I needed to ensure everything was okay. Nervously, I tiptoed toward the back, peering around. All seemed clear until I reached the bathrooms. The men's was empty, but I heard a faint sound from the women's, a stall being locked. I hesitated, then decided it was better to call out rather than enter. "Hey Josh, I'm here," I called out, but only silence answered. Just then, the entrance door chimed open. Relief washed over me as Josh walked in. "Hey, wasn't sure if you were in the back," I said. "No, just stepped out for a smoke," he replied casually. "Ah, of course. Should have checked there first," I mumbled. Josh gathered his belongings from behind the counter, gave a brief nod, and left. Frankly, Josh isn't the most lively company, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't particularly like me. Watching his car drive away, I felt an uneasy dread creeping in. I sighed and braced myself for the night ahead. Normally only 3 or 4 customers stop by for gas, but tonight was unexpectedly busy. It was a welcome distraction, keeping my mind off the usual worries that come with working in such a secluded spot. Being about 4 hours from the beach, the gas station saw a steady flow of large families stopping for gas, snacks, and bathroom breaks, repeatedly. Trouble began around 1:30 a.m. A family of 3 pulled in, a middle-aged couple and their young son. The man and son headed to the men's restroom while the woman approached the women's, but quickly recoiled, her face contorted in disgust. She approached me. "I hate to complain, but there's a terrible stench in the women's restroom. It's really bad." "I'm so sorry about that," I apologized. As her husband and son joined us, the man asked, "What's the problem?" "The women's restroom smells awful," she explained. "I'll take care of it right away," I assured them, offering, "In the meantime, feel free to use the men's restroom." "The men's is fine," her husband joked. "You ladies really do a number on your restroom, huh?" "Will you come with me?" she asked him, needing his company. "Of course," he agreed. By the time I managed to locate the air freshener in the back, the family had already left. Hearing the door chime again, I rushed to check and saw them driving away. The store was empty, so I headed towards the women's restroom to address the foul odor. She wasn't exaggerating. The moment I opened the door to the women's restroom, a horrible stench hit me. I quickly covered my nose and stepped inside, only to spot muddy shoe prints all over the floor. Josh was supposed to clean before leaving, which made the mess even more infuriating. I couldn't recall seeing anyone with muddy shoes that evening, nor did I remember any women using the restroom. Muttering curses at Josh and the unknown messmaker, I sprayed air freshener liberally, but it barely made a dent in the foul smell. Then, I noticed one of the stalls was locked, and my heart started racing. The muddy prints led straight to it. I stood frozen for what felt like ages, staring at the locked stall door. Gathering my courage, I finally bent down to peer under it. The stall was empty, but the stench was overwhelming. It hit me so hard I nearly gagged. I rushed out to catch my breath and avoid throwing up. Once composed, I returned with a face mask and mopped the floor. As I cleaned, I puzzled over why someone would lock the stall from inside and then escape. I chalked it up to the door, somehow locking itself after being slammed. After drying the floor, I crawled under the stall door to investigate further. Inside, the stall was relatively clean, except for a muddy handprint on the door. Then, to my horror, I found a dead catfish in the toilet, gutted with a bite taken out of its side, its blood staining the porcelain. I exclaimed in shock and disgust. After unlocking the stall, I returned to the lobby and checked the time. 2:03 a.m. I was torn between calling Margot, Josh, or even the police. What was going on with people around here? Trying to rationalize the bizarre scene, I convinced myself it was just a teenage prank. I put my mask back on and finished cleaning up the mess. I triple-bagged the fish and tossed it into the dumpster outside. Normally, I avoid walking around at night, but I would rather face that than endure the smell of the fish any longer. Once back inside, I manned the counter for a few hours. To lift my spirits, I watched episodes of Schitt's Creek on my phone, which helped pass the time and kept my mind in a safe place. My stomach rumbled, but I wasn't hungry. When you're alone, the protocol for a quick bathroom break is simple. Make it fast, especially before a customer arrives. For anything more substantial, you need to ensure the parking lot is empty and the store is clear. You put up a back in 5 minutes sign and lock the door. I told myself it would take less than 5 minutes. If I had known what was about to happen, I would have left that place forever. After setting the sign, I locked the door. I entered the last stall, locked it, and distracted myself with a puzzle game on my phone. That's when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, an eye peering through the stall door crack. The person was leaning in close, their gaze intense and unblinked. My heart raced and I froze in terror, wishing this nightmare would end. The peeper had long, dark brown hair that looked dirty and wet. They were barefoot, their toenails long and curling. Their appearance was grimy, as if they had just emerged from a lake. They kept staring, then switched eyes to continue watching me. It seemed like they were trying to speak, but no sound came out. Finally, I reacted just as I had imagined in my mind. I screamed, "Hey, get out of here. I'm calling the police. I have a gun. Don't make me use it." I quickly pulled up my pants and stood up. Suddenly, I heard the sound of wet, bare feet running out of the bathroom. I dialed 911 and, fueled by adrenaline, kicked the stall door open. I'm not usually an intimidating person. I'd never been in a fight and never wanted to be. But at that moment, I was ready to defend myself. Fear and anger surged through me as I yelled, "Hey, come back here, you creep!" Rushing into the gas station lobby, I found it empty. I checked the door. It was still locked. The 911 operator was speaking, but I was too focused on finding the intruder to respond. I cautiously moved around the shelves, prepared for whatever might come. There was no sign of him in the lobby. I noticed wet footprints again, this time leading to the women's restroom. I hesitated, torn between fleeing and dealing with the situation. Part of me wanted to just leave. This job wasn't worth the risk, but another part urged me to grab the club from under the counter and confront the problem. The 911 operator kept asking, "Sir, are you there?" I focused on the bathroom door, brought the phone to my ear, and whispered, "There's a man in my gas station." They asked if I was in danger, to which I quietly replied, "I'm not sure." The operator asked if I could escape. I glanced at the front door. It was a straight path to my car, but then I looked back at the women's restroom. I gave them the address, put the phone down on the counter, and picked up the club. With the club in hand, I cautiously opened the women's restroom door, ready to swing at any sign of movement. The same stall I had unlocked earlier was closed again. I yelled, "Come on out! The police are on their way!" The silence that followed was overwhelming. I shouted again, "Don't make me do this." Peering under the stall showed nothing. Bracing myself, I kicked the door open, half expecting to find that creep standing on the toilet with those wide eyes, but the stall was empty. I spun around, tense and ready for an attack from behind, but no one was there. The creep had vanished. I checked the entire gas station, but found no one. I was alone. There were no footprints leading outside, and both the front and back doors were still locked. It felt surreal. I knew I hadn't imagined it. The fear and the mess were too real. Minutes later, the police arrived, an older officer. I quickly let him in. "Everything all right?" he asked, shining his flashlight around. I explained what happened, but omitted that the doors were still locked. I didn't want to be dismissed as just seeing things or being tired. "Damn hooligans," he muttered. "Did y'all ever get security cameras?" "No, I don't think we have any," I replied. "I figured after last time y'all would have gotten something," he said. "Last time?" I was confused, assuming I was the new guy. "Yeah, about a month ago, we had an incident here. A girl was quite shaken up, said a man attacked her and trashed the store. Probably the same guy, if I had to guess," he explained. "Did you ever find anything out?" I asked. "Not much to go on. We searched but found nothing. Felt so bad for that girl," he said with a sigh. "What happened to her?" I inquired. "Not sure, really. Doubt she came back," he answered. "Stay here and keep the door locked. I'll sweep the area," he instructed before heading outside. I didn't think it would help much. I stayed by the door, constantly looking over my shoulder. Eventually, he returned and reported finding nothing. I asked the officer if he could stay until daylight. "Normally, I wouldn't, but second incident, I'll stick around," he replied, though he warned he'd leave if called else. I thanked him profusely as he parked his cruiser in front of the entrance. Presence made me feel safer, yet still got goosebumps every time I glanced towards the bath. I stayed at the counter for the rest of my shift. As morning arrived, the officer checked in before leaving. asking if anything else had happened. I told him nothing more occurred, and he urged me to call if anything changed. His concern was comforting, but I didn't truly relax until Margot arrived. As soon as she walked in, I blurted out everything about the night's event. Margot sighed and dismissed my concerns, saying, "Strange things just happen here. It comes with the territory." I was shocked by how lightly she took. This had been a traumatic event for me, and she seemed in. "Why don't we have cameras?" I asked, frustrated. "Can't afford those fancy cameras, and frankly, I don't think we need them," she replied. "This place isn't really bothered, at least not financially." "What happened to the girl who worked here before me?" I pressed on. "I think she was just scared of the dark. Some people aren't cut out for the night shift," Margot responded dismissively. "Why don't you head home? If it makes you feel better, I'll switch you to the 3:11 shift tomorrow and Josh can cover the night." I nodded and went to sit in my car where I'm writing this now. I need a job, but not at this cost. Despite my instincts screaming otherwise, I'm still working here. Now on the 3:11 shift, and the past couple of days have been uneventful. I couldn't stop thinking about the girl who worked here before me, so one day when Margot was out, I decided to do some digging. I checked the time logs going back a few months and found Kaylee's last entry just days before I started. Curious, I looked her up on Facebook and found a profile that seemed to match. Her photos confirmed it. There was even a selfie taken behind the counter at our gas station. I sent her a friend request and she accepted a few hours later. I messaged her, introducing myself as the current employee at the gas station and asking if she was the same Kaylee who had previously worked there. After a long pause, she simply replied yes. I asked if she'd like to meet for coffee to talk about her experiences at the gas station, and she agreed. We set a time to meet at a downtown diner. The next morning, I was at the diner early, sitting in a corner booth and anxiously watching the door. Each time it opened, my heart jumped until finally Kaylee walked in. She looked nothing like the cheerful girl in her face. She appeared utterly exhausted. I waved her over, and she slowly made her way to the booth and slid in across from me. "Kaylee?" I asked gently. She nodded timidly and glanced nervously around. "Are you alone?" she inquired. "Yes, of course," I reassured. A waitress came by and set down 2 cups of coffee. Kaylee clutched her cup and stared into it before I broke the silence. "Thanks for meeting me," I said, trying to ease into the conversation. "How long did you work there?" "Just a week," she replied quietly. "And what hours did they have?" "Margot trained me for the first couple of days, then switched me to the night shift. I wasn't comfortable with it, but it was either that or find a new job," she explained, her voice soft but strained. Kaylee admitted that the job paid surprisingly well and that Margot had been incredibly kind to her, assuring her there would be no problems and to call her anytime, reminding her of her daughter. "So what happened that first night alone?" I asked. "Nothing. The first night was uneventful and I enjoyed the quiet. It allowed me to read a lot," she explained. "But the next night," she paused, taking a sip of her coffee and a deep breath, her face showing sheer terror. "That was the worst night of my life." "Take your time," I encouraged, trying to offer some comfort. "It was around 3 a.m. I had been reading for hours and decided to stretch my leg. After walking around the lobby, I realized I hadn't used the bathroom all night," Kaylee continued. She had put up a "Be back in 5 minutes" sign and went to the back women's stall. "I just couldn't shake the feeling that I was," she said, her voice trembling. Then I felt a drip of water on my head, followed by another. I looked up, half expecting a leaky ceiling, but dead. She paused, looking down to gather herself before meeting my visible fear. I saw a face looking down at me through a ceiling. Its wet hair dripped in wide eyes and did. Startled, I screamed and ran from the stall. I barely remember pulling up my pants. As I was opening the bathroom door to escape, I heard it drop from the ceiling to the floor with a loud thud that sent. I didn't look. Rushed to the lobby, aiming for the front door, but by the time I reached the door, it was already there in the lobby with me. I saw its reflection in the glass. It stopped and just stared at me. That's when I realized it was naked, she finished, her voice barely above a whisper. "It looked human, but also not quite right," Kaylee said, her voice shaky. She quickly unlocked the door, opened it, and shut it behind her as fast as she could. When she turned to hold the door closed, the figure was still standing in the same spot, seemingly muttering to itself, though she couldn't hear what it was saying. She continued, visibly terrified. At that point, I realized I didn't have my keys and couldn't run to my car. My only option was to stand in front of the door, hold it shut, and pray that this creature wasn't as strong as it. She positioned herself with her back against the door, pushing hard against it with her feet planted firmly on the ground. I wasn't sure if it was worse not seeing it or not knowing what it was doing. During this, I called 911 and they said a deputy was on the way, she explained. Suddenly, she could hear loud banging from inside. She glanced behind and saw it knocking over a rack of hats near the door, throwing items around in a blind rage. When it noticed her looking, it began walking toward the door. She paused, then said, I braced myself, pushing as hard as I could against the door, but I never felt any pressure. When I looked back, its face was pressed against the glass behind me, just inches away. I was in shock and couldn't look away. Then it attempted a smile, revealing a wide grin of stained, crooked teeth. I don't know how long I stood there before I saw the blue lights of the police car reflecting in the window. I looked back at the store and it was gone. Kaylee's eyes filled with tears and her hands shook. I felt guilty for pressing her, but I asked, what happened when the cops arrived? I ran to the officer as fast as I could, trying to explain what happened, though I was probably mumbling. He checked inside, but found no one. I told him about the ceiling, but he saw no signs of anyone being there. She sighed deep. I called Margot and told her everything. She was more upset that I called the police instead of her. Going from, you remind me so much of my daughter, to, why would you call the police? Something I still can't. I drove down that day and dropped the keys off at the door. I couldn't bear the thought of stepping inside. Since then, I've hardly slept, haunted by the face I saw every time I started doubting myself, wondering if I had imagined till your message firm. I wasn't. You really saw it too? I asked. Yes, and it's okay, Kaylee reassured me. By the way, who actually owns this place? I assumed it was Margot since she acts like it, I replied. Wondering aloud, I said, how could we find out? There's no we in this. I want nothing to do with that place anymore. Please don't tell anyone we met or what I've, she insisted firmly. You're not going back, questioned pride. What good would closure do for me? Knowing who or what it was won't help me sleep, she responded. We sat in silence, Kaylee looking resolved, final sip of her coffee. If you really want to help, burn that plate. She left $3 on the table and walked out. I lingered over 3 more coffees, feeling deeply for her. Her ordeal seemed far worse than mine. Perhaps it was less aggressive with me because it was intimidated. That night, my thoughts fixated on the ceiling and the locked stall, which might explain how it escaped so quickly. On my first night back for the 3rd shift after Josh left, I waited anxiously for the quieter hours. Around 3:30 a.m., I put up the be back in 5 minutes sign, locked the door, and with a club in hand, headed to the women's bathroom. My heart pounded with a mix of fear and adrenaline. Driven by curiosity, I focused on the 3rd stall, the same one Kaylee had used where the catfish had been found. It was wide open and the bathroom looked spotless. Taking a deep breath, I wiped the sweat from my shaking hands and stepped into the stall to look up at the ceiling. I stood on the toilet, my head just inches from the ceiling tile, listening intently to ensure I was alone. After confirming silence, I used the club to gently push the tile aside, then paused to listen again, half expecting a face to appear from the darkness. Still, nothing happened. Turning on my phone's flashlight, I peered into the ceiling and shone the light around. Thankfully, there was no sign of the dripping, wet man. It all looked normal until I noticed a small, square hole toward the back of the gas station. Gathering my courage, I hoisted myself into the ceiling space. The tiles felt surprisingly sturdy under my weight, and I prayed they wouldn't give way. As I crawled toward the hole, it became evident that this was no accident. It was deliberately cut, with a piece of the wall propped up beside it, seemingly meant to conceal it. Crawling through, I entered a small room about 4 by 4 feet, containing nothing but a hole in the floor and an old wooden ladder descending into the dark. I shined my flashlight down the hole but couldn't see the bottom. It was deep. Curious, I dropped a nickel in and counted 5 seconds before hearing a faint splash. There was definitely water down. After some contemplation, I decided against climbing down. I crawled back, replaced the ceiling tile, and checked the bathroom for any signs of intrusion. Everything appeared normal. Returning to the lobby, I found an old trucker waiting at the door. I removed the sign and unlocked it, apologizing for the wait. Oh, it's all right. Just need to use the bathroom real quick, he replied cheerfully. For the rest of the night, I couldn't stop thinking about that ladder and its purpose. Where did it lead? And how was it connected to the mysterious appearance? Clearly, something far stranger than I could have imagined was unfolding here, but the full extent remained elusive.